Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The vast stretch of the Atlantic Ocean, though seemingly an insurmountable divide, has never been an unbridgeable chasm between Africa and the Americas. Centuries before the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade, before European powers carved new destinies for millions, connections existed between African civilizations and the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Yet, beyond the forced migrations of enslaved Africans, there lies a deeper, more ancient connection, one that speaks of shared ancestry, cultural exchanges, and a history intertwined long before recorded history. The ancestral ties between black natives of the Americas and the great West African kingdoms remain one of history's most compelling yet often obscured narratives. As we unravel the fabric of this complex past, we find not merely traces of African presence in the pre-Columbian Americas, but living proof of ancient migrations, trade, and cultural fusion that predate Columbus' fabled voyages. Oral histories passed down through generations among indigenous communities speak of black-skinned people who arrived in great numbers, some as traders, others as warriors, and still others as healers, priests, and leaders. Meanwhile, in the royal courts of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, whispers of distant lands across the great western waters find echoes in maps, artifacts, and spiritual practices that seem eerily similar to those found among black native communities of the Americas. This intricate web of shared traditions, linguistic parallels, architectural marvels, and spiritual kinship paints a picture of an ancient brotherhood, one that neither time nor conquest could fully erase. These connections, often dismissed or overshadowed by Eurocentric narratives, challenge the prevailing idea that Africa and the Americas were two wholly separate worlds before the age of European exploration. Instead, they reveal a deeper truth. The ancestors of modern black natives and the West African kingdoms were bound by history, fate, and blood. Long before European ships set sail for the Americas, African seafarers had already navigated the Atlantic, exploring lands far beyond their continental shores. Ancient Egyptian and Nubian records contain references to lands across the Great Sea, where people of familiar stature and customs lived. The Great Malian Empire, under the reign of Emperor Abubakari, further adds credence to this history. According to oral traditions and historical accounts, Abubakari, who ruled Mali in the early 14th century, launched a vast expedition to the west, seeking new lands and trade routes. This expedition, consisting of hundreds of ships, disappeared into the Atlantic, never to return, at least not to Africa. But what if they had reached the Americas? The presence of distinctly West African cultural elements among certain indigenous tribes in the Americas suggests that these explorers may have indeed made landfall and intermingled with native societies. Some indigenous oral traditions recount the arrival of dark-skinned mariners who introduced new agricultural techniques, religious practices, and even elements of metallurgy. The construction of pyramidal structures, particularly in Mesoamerican civilizations such as the Olmecs, bears striking similarities to the architectural feats of the West African kingdoms. The colossal Olmec heads, with their distinctly African facial features, further hint at the possibility of an ancient African presence in the Americas long before European intervention. Beyond physical evidence, cultural and linguistic similarities further highlight the ancestral bonds between black natives and the kingdoms of West Africa. The spiritual traditions of many indigenous groups in North and South America contain elements that closely resemble African religious practices. The reverence for ancestral spirits, the use of drumming in ceremonial rites, and even divination methods find remarkable parallels in African traditions, particularly those of the Yoruba, Akan, and Bantu-speaking peoples. The sacred rituals of the Black Caribs, Garifuna, in the Caribbean, for instance, bear a striking resemblance to the ancestral veneration practices found in West Africa. Furthermore, linguistic studies have uncovered possible links between certain indigenous languages of the Americas and African dialects. Words and phonetic structures in some native languages closely align with those of the Mande and Wolof languages, suggesting a possible historical connection. While linguistic similarities alone cannot serve as definitive proof of ancient African migration, they contribute to the growing body of evidence pointing to a shared past. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence tying black natives to West African ancestors comes from genetic research. Modern DNA analysis has revealed that some indigenous groups in the Americas particularly in the Caribbean and parts of South America, share mitochondrial DNA haplogroups with West African populations. This genetic continuity suggests that African bloodlines have long been a part of the indigenous gene pool, not solely due to the forced migration of enslaved Africans, but as a result of much earlier interactions and unions between these communities. The Black Seminoles of Florida, for example, are a living testament to these deep-rooted ties. While many trace their ancestry to escaped African slaves who found refuge among the Seminole Nation, oral traditions within the community suggest a much older African presence in the region. Their cultural practices, agricultural methods, and even elements of their language bear striking resemblances to those of West African peoples, reinforcing the notion that their African ancestry predates the arrival of European slavers. Despite centuries of colonial disruption, the descendants of these intertwined peoples have fought to preserve their cultural heritage. Black Native communities across the Americas continue to uphold traditions that reflect their African and indigenous roots, blending spiritual practices, folklore, and artistic expressions that speak to their dual ancestry. In the face of systemic erasure, these communities have maintained their identity, passing down oral histories that affirm their place in the broader narrative of human history. The colonial powers that sought to divide and suppress these histories failed to erase them completely. Today, scholars, historians, and community elders work tirelessly to reclaim and celebrate the shared past. From the Gullah Geechee people of the southeastern United States to the Afro-Indigenous communities of Brazil, Mexico, and the Caribbean, the evidence of ancestral ties between Black natives and West African kingdoms continues to emerge, defying the imposed narratives of history books. The ancestral ties between Black natives and West African kingdoms are more than just historical curiosities. They are living testaments to a shared past that stretches across continents and centuries. These connections, whether forged through ancient migration, cultural exchange, or the resilience of enslaved Africans who found refuge among indigenous peoples, reveal a deeper truth about the interconnectedness of human civilization. As new evidence continues to surface and long-overlooked histories find their rightful place in the narrative, the descendants of these great peoples stand as reminders of the endurance of culture, identity, and the unbreakable bonds of ancestry. Their story is one of resilience, unity, and an enduring link between two worlds that were never as separate as history once claimed. It is a story that demands recognition, celebration, and continued exploration, for within it lies the true tapestry of human history, one woven with the threads of shared heritage and undeniable kinship.